Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let's see, we have almost 9 o'clock exactly here, so give a couple of minutes for people to join us here on Saturday, which is exciting. This is the first time we've tried this on a Saturday. So as people are coming in, we want to say hi, welcome. It would be great if you could say hello just so we know that you're here, and making sure everything is working smoothly, and also put in the comments where you're from. I think that was really fun last time to see where everybody was tuning in from collectively. So just drop a hello, let us know where you're from. And yeah, this is the first time, welcome to the weekend edition. I think it would also be great, since this is the first time we've tried this, if you can comment whether or not you're happy that this was on a weekend. Just as we continue to hone these talks, any feedback that you have is really, really helpful. So if you could put that below as well, that would be great. And as we're waiting for people to join us here today, we're going to start with a trivia question, as we usually do. This one's a little different. It's about another critter in snow leopard habitat. But the question is, one of the ticks that was collected off of Gustav will be joining us in a minute officially for the disease study in 2015 carried how many different bacterial diseases? It's a little different way to kick this off, but again, we're wondering how many diseases did a tick that was collected from Gustav for a disease study carry? South Africa, hello Dee. Any guesses for the bacterial diseases found in a tick in Mongolia? Hey, people are excited that it's on a weekend. I see someone from Columbus, Ohio, from the Netherlands, someone from Seattle. That's where I am from as well right now. It's exciting. All right. So welcome again to, this is our fifth one. I can't believe we've done 5 already. It's been really fun, and I've learned a lot through these as well. Ranjana from India, Elizabeth Brill. Hi, Elizabeth. I know people are saying they're getting up early or staying up late. I know the time zones are also kind of tricky. We're going to be moving them around a little bit, trying to accommodate as many people as possible. So appreciate that. All right. So I see a few guesses coming in here. I think so we can get started. I'm going to reveal the answer, which was very surprising to me, but it's actually 39. And we have a little bit more about that disease study on our blog as well, but I was really surprised to hear that number. I was thinking maybe 8 or 9, but 39 was the amount of bacterial diseases found on a tick that we collected from Gustav for our disease study as part of the long-term ecological study. Oh, so that's another side of the field work for sure. Okay, so with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Marissa Naranjan from the Snow Leopard Trust, and we're excited to welcome you all here today for our 5th live chat with a scientist on a Saturday, again, weekend edition. Thank you for being here with us. We acknowledge this is a really heavy time for various reasons. And while it is difficult, I think, that discomfort really underscores the need to strive for a, just society, and one that respects all people and the environment. So today, I just really feel this opportunity to really make change and affect change and kind of turn that wheel of change. So as we do that collectively as a global community, I just really ask that you stay strong and stay safe. And thank you for being here with us today. So I am thrilled to be here with Gustaf Samelius. He came to the Snow Leopard Trust as our Assistant Director of Science in 2012. His work involves coordinating our long-term ecological study in Mongolia. And before joining our team, Gustaf spent several years conducting wildlife research in the Canadian Arctic and the boreal forests of Sweden. He has worked a lot with the lynx and did his doctorate work on the Arctic foxes in northern Canada. And I would also like to add, I mean, Gustav is just one of just the greatest people that I know, and has very calm and peaceful energy. And no matter where he is in the world, as long as he has Wi-Fi, every time I email him, he'll get right back to me like within a couple of hours with really thoughtful edits and answers. And it's just always there for our team. And I really, really appreciate that. So thank you, Gustav. And he, to intro a little bit what he'll be talking about today, we've talked about this in a couple of other live chats, if you go back or if you've been with us on those, about our long-term ecological study in Mongolia. That is made possible by our partners in Mongolia, the Snow Leopard Conservation Foundation, and it's now in its 12th year. So Gustav is really going to talk about and focus on what we've learned, why we continue, and how the long-term study benefits conservation efforts. So again, as per usual, as he's talking, please feel free to ask questions in the comment section. We'll get to them at the end. Whatever we're not able to answer, we can follow up with you after the talk as well. So if anything pops to mind, pop it in that comment box so we can answer it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Gustav.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see now if we get the slideshow up here. Let's see. I think, oh yes, thank you, Gustav. And I'm gonna wait until it's large like that, and I'm gonna do this. Okay, so thank you, Marissa, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you are. And I also just want to follow up on what Marissa said and take the opportunity to say that I hope that you guys are doing fine in these sort of strange and very difficult times. So today I'm going to talk, I'd say, for about 15 minutes. It's not a very long presentation, but I'm going to talk about the long-term study in southern Mongolia. A lot of you have, like Marissa said, already heard a lot of things about this, and you know that it's done in the Tost Mountains in southern Mongolia. And what I'm going to focus on today then is what we have learned. And of course, I can't do that in 15 minutes. I will pick a few highlights. And then I will talk a little bit about why do we continue? Like, why don't we go somewhere else? And people often ask us, you know, like Marissa said, we've been there for 12 years now. Why don't we go somewhere else? And that's a very good question and a very relevant question. But I hope after I'm done that if anything, that you're going to sort of realize the benefits of long-term studies, why we don't just do shorter studies and go around. Because you could argue, why don't you go somewhere else and learn about snow leopard biology somewhere else? So I hope that's the sort of objective of my talk, that you're going to understand what is the benefits of long-term studies. But before we get into details about long-term studies, I want to give you a little bit of background about the long-term study in the Tost Mountains. And what you see now is a map of Mongolia. And about a month ago, Örjan was talking about the long-term study, and he mentioned that Mongolia is a quite large country, about the size of Alaska, or me sitting here in Sweden, being from Sweden, it's about 4 times as big as Sweden, or about 3 times as big as France. So it's quite a big country. Not very many people. There's only about 3 million people in Mongolia, so not very densely populated country. It's right smack in the middle of Asia. It's sort of squished in between Russia to the north and China to the south. So sort of sitting into of these 2 big superpowers, and there's Mongolia in the middle. And on the map you have in brown are the mountains of Mongolia, and you can see there along the southwest corner, that's the biggest mountain range. It's called the Altai Mountains. And Tost Mountains, where we work and where the long-term study is indicated by that little red dots at the bottom of the map. And in green, you can also see that's the snow leopard range. And you already know that snow leopards are in the mountains. So you see how the green and the brown is overlapping. So most of the snow leopards in Mongolia are in the Altai Mountains along that southwest border of the country. Okay, so if we switch to Tost Mountains then, it's in the southernmost province. It's called the South Gobi province. It's also the largest province in Mongolia. And it's also in the Gobi Desert, so it's very, very dry. And the little precipitation that comes in the form of rain in summer. And we spoke to Baira a few days ago, and she said that right now it's raining in the Gobi. But that's more or less all the precipitation. They get a little bit of snow in the winters, but not much at all. So, okay, so that's a little bit about background about Mongolia and the Tost Mountains. And just to give you an idea how it looks, this is a picture of the Tost Mountains. And I would say this is a very typical picture. Mountains and then sort of intersected by these big valleys. And Marisa said we started in 2008 and we're now down 12 years. And so why do we continue? That's sort of the whole central theme of the talk I'm giving here today. And in the Tost Mountains and really anywhere where you have snow leopards, they share the mountains with livestock herders, and they've done so for a long, long time. You know, hundreds of generations, probably 1,000 generations. So this is a long history of sort of coexistence between the people. And you also know that a lot of our work is focused on facilitating this coexistence so that both people and snow leopards can continue to live in these mountains in Central Asia. Okay, so that's the background I wanted to share with you about Tost Mountains. So what have we learned? And like I said, I can't summarize that in only 15 minutes, but so I picked sort of 3 different highlights. And those of you that saw Örjan's presentation about a month ago, he talked a lot about the spatial aspects, or how snow leopards are moving around in the mountains. And one thing that we have learned from the study in Tost Mountains that we didn't really know before is that they are territorial. That means that animals of the same sex will aggressively defend an area. So you will not have 2 dominant males in the same area, and you will not have 2 dominant females in the same area. One of them will chase the other one away. That means that we can, each area can have less cats, because if we could put as many cats as possible, we could really stack a lot of cats in there. But now they're aggressively going to defend their area, so you can only have 1 dominant male and 1 dominant female. That means that there are fewer cats in the areas than we knew before. And we have also learned that they have really large home ranges. They're about 10 times as large as we thought before. So they really need large areas. And what this also means is the protected areas that are in the snow leopard range, that's not enough to protect the snow leopards. Only a small portion of the global snow leopard population will fit in these protected areas, which again means that we have to rely on coexistence. So help facilitate people and snow leopards to coexist. The other thing that we've learned is that they prey mostly on ibex, and ibex are a wild goat, but they also prey a fair bit on livestock. And like anywhere in the world, when you have carnivores and livestock, and you will also have livestock depredation, and that results in a conflict. So again, really stressing, we really need to help herders to live in these areas so that we can also safeguard the snow leopards at the same time. A third thing, and that little story about the tick with the 39 bacterial diseases, yes, that was collected from me, and it was kind of funny because Carol, who did her PhD on diseases in the Tost Mountains, she was collecting ticks, and one day I feel, oh, there's something crawling. It's like, oh wow, crikey, this is a tick here. And I said to Karen, do you want this? And she said, sure. She took it, and I didn't think much about it. And then about a year later, she emailed me and she said, do you remember that tick? And I'm like, yeah. And then she said, you know how many diseases? I'm like, no. And she said, there's bacterial diseases, 39, and those are only the bacterial diseases. We didn't test for viral diseases. So there are a lot of different diseases. Most of them are not, don't have a super strong impact, but interesting, where we're sitting today with the pandemic, snow leopards also have corona. They have a different strain, but out of the 18 snow leopards that we tested for corona, 4 of them had been exposed to it. So they had antibodies, which means that they have survived and are doing fine. So we have tested snow leopards, we have tested rodents, we have tested ticks, we have tested goats and dogs. So we try to get sort of as holistic of a picture as possible of the ecosystem to see where are the diseases and which are common, to sort of try and understand how the diseases are moving around in the system. And why is that important? Because that can help us with disease management. Because all of the diseases that we work with are what's called zoonosis, like corona that we're experiencing now. And zoonosis is a disease that can jump from wildlife to livestock to people. So the wildlife can get affected, the livestock can get affected, and the people can get affected. So it's important that we learn about diseases. And this was completely unknown. So this is also something that we have learned. Okay, so we have learned a lot of things, but yet there's a lot of things that we do not know. And I've listed 3 things here. So reproduction and survival. So for example, when do the snow leopards start to reproduce? At what age? How many young do they get? Do they get 1, 2, 3, 4? How many on average, and what is the range? How often do they reproduce? And we're just starting to learn that they are reproducing every second year, more or less, but sometimes they appear to skip a year. So how frequent is this? That will help us understand the snow leopards a lot more. Also, how long do they live? How long? What is the survival of the little guys, and what is the survival of the adults? And right now we have 2 snow leopards that are 11 years old, and they're reproducing and doing fine. So yes, we know they can definitely live for 11 years, but they can probably live up to about 20, but we don't have that information. And why? Because we need to follow them over a long time to get that information. Another thing there is basically no information is dispersal, and dispersal is the permanent movement from one area to another. So let's say a young animal is born here, and when they move and establish, how far do they move, and how does that differ between males and females? We don't know anything about that. And also, do adult animals sometimes decide to move to another area, and if so, why? Maybe because they are getting a little older, there's a new dominant animal coming in and pushing them away, so they're forced to disperse. We really don't know anything about this. Also, we don't know how the number of snow leopards vary over time. You know, if we would follow them for a long time, what is the natural fluctuation? All animal populations vary over time, but how big are the fluctuations, and what are the factors that drive that? Is it only the food abundance, or maybe it's water, maybe it's diseases? So if we can understand that, we can understand why snow leopard numbers go up and down and how they vary in space. So the obvious question then saying, okay, we don't know these things. You could argue then, well, is this information important? And if it's important, how do we get that? Well, I've kind of sort of answered these questions already. In the next slide, I'm going to try and illustrate why I think it's so important to do the long-term studies and get this information, for example, reproduction and survival. And how do we get it? Well, if you want to see how animals vary over time, obviously we have to follow them over time. And if we want to see how long animals live, well, we have to follow them over time. That means long-term studies. So if we want to get to this specific information, the only way to get that is to follow animals over a long time or do long-term studies. Okay, this next slide is I don't think it's too complicated, but yeah, it's going to involve some modeling, but I have simplified it to some extent. And what I want to do here is I'm going to try and give an example of the importance of long-term studies and get this information that we cannot get any other way. And I'm sure that most of you have heard that IUCN, which is the International Conservation Union, about every year or so, they do an assessment to see what is the conservation status of the different species. And in 2017, the conservation status of snow leopards was changed from endangered to vulnerable. And they've always been endangered since the early 1980s when IUCN started. They've always been endangered. And 2017, they changed to be vulnerable. And this is a big, big thing, because really the signal here is they're not as threatened as they used to be. But yet everybody knows that the population size is slowly going down and the threats are increasing. So how can this be? And the most important part in this whole process was what's called a population model. And population model is a mathematical model. And if we simplify it, basically you have input information going into the model. There's a lot of computation going around in the model, and then the model kicks something out. And I've simplified it to just say conservation status. So of course, in this process, the conservation studies is what we're interested in. So the input here is going to be biological information about snow leopards. And examples of important information that goes into this model is reproduction, like how old are they when they start to reproduce? How many cubs do they get? How often do they reproduce? Also, how long do they live? So how many reproductions can one cat contribute? All of these factors goes into here. And I just told you that we don't have that information. So what do we do then? Well, then we do the second best thing. We take information from other similar animals, like other large cats. And everybody realizes, of course, that's the second best option. It would have been a lot better if we had information for snow leopards that we could plug into this, since this IUCN process has such a big influence on snow leopard conservation. It would have been so much better if we had that information for snow leopards. And like I said, the only way to get that is through long-term studies. So hopefully, I'm maybe sounding a little bit like a preacher here, but I hope that everybody agrees that yes, long-term studies, by doing this, we can get certain information that can be crucial for certain things. And the only way to get that is long-term information. So, long-term studies. So to sum it up, why do we continue at Tost? Why don't we go somewhere else, learn about snow leopards in some other area? Good question. But why don't we do that? And what are the benefits of long-term studies? Well, it's simply because there's some type of information that we can only get through long-term studies. And this information is very important, one, for understanding the biology of the species, but also for evaluating the conservation status, like the IUCN assessment. And the last thing I want to say here before we get into questions is, when I'm saying that long-term studies are really important, I'm not trying to say that shorter studies are not important. They are super important as well. They are just addressing different questions. So we have shorter efforts or shorter studies. We address certain things. Then we have longer studies. Then we address different questions. So it's to find the right combination of short-term studies and long-term studies is the best that we can do. And with that, I'm done with hoping to try and convince you about the importance of long-term studies.
Hello. I'm convinced. I was already, but even more so now. Yeah, that was amazing. And I think too, like, of course, we are a nonprofit. We partner with various people, across the range and different organizations. So it's like for us, looking at our resources and like what, where can we best place those, to get the biggest output, and how can we partner to get the biggest output. So being strategic about that is really important, and focusing on that area. So that was great. Thank you so much, Gustav. I'm looking at some questions coming in here, and while they do, I guess I was going to ask too, like if the world was kind of as it was before, would you be in Mongolia right now, or kind of what does your typical year look like?
Yeah, my good question. My typical year is that me and Örjan and our colleagues in Mongolia, we go to the field in the spring and in the fall, and that's to catch and mark the snow leopards, to put collars on them, and now also ibex and goats, and we do some other things. Our colleagues, of course, are more or less in the field the whole time. I sometimes go in summer, and that's if we have a female with young, or sometimes to help with the camera study. But our local rangers, they're so good now. They look after the camera study. So for me, it's usually spring, about a good month and a half, and in fall. This year, though, and last year I was in the field also in winter, which was very interesting. It was the first time I've been there in winter, so that was interesting too. But in general, spring and fall.
I know your tick story was funny too. You're a scientist when you find that, like, oh, would you want this? Like, oh, absolutely. They're excited about it. Yeah. That made me chuckle. Let's see. So there's a question from Jen asking, can a dominant snow leopard live in the same area as a younger snow leopard? Have we seen that?
Good question. And yes, it seems like they can I'm not sure if it's hormones or whatever it is, or if the younger ones just keep a low profile. But yeah, we do have it. From what we have found so far, only one dominant male and one dominant female, but there are or subadults or young animals in, and for some reason, uh, either they don't pose a threat for competing for mating opportunities or something, but they do seem to tolerate the young animals. We do have overlap there.
Let's see. There's a couple questions from Lynn. I'll start with the first one. She asks if herders move their animals or do they settle more in an area? And how does that affect snow leopard ranges? And I know this will be different. This is different kind of in each country that we work. So the Snow Leopard Trust is, although our long-term study is in Mongolia, we also do work in Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, India, and China. So this will be a little bit different across the range. But Gustav, do you want to maybe speak to Mongolia and kind of around that LTES?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in Mongolia, the herders are still nomadics, and they used to move quite a few times, maybe sort of 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a year. Nowadays, they usually move about twice a year. So they have one summer range and one winter range. And in general, so Tost Mountains is sort of an isolated little mountain range, and to the north and to the south, you have steppes. So in the summer, they move out on the steppe, and then they're not. The herders are not suffering from any snow leopard predation. The wolves are out there, but in summer they're out in the steppes, and then in winter they move into the mountains to sort of seek shelter in there. In most of the other ranges, they're not nomadic. So they have one. This is my turf, and you go back and forth from there. So you don't move you don't change areas. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and some follow-up that she asked, which I can also, you can maybe touch on this briefly, Gustav, and we do have some other live chats that cover asking sort of what methods we use to track the cats. Like, is it cameras, or what are some of our methods for tracking? Do you want to touch on that briefly? And then we can link to some of the other information too afterwards, but some of our methodology for the cats.
Yeah, like Marisa said, I mean, we use basically 2 methods to track the cats. To get really detailed information, Örjan was talking about a month ago about the coloring aspect. So you can get fantastic and very detailed information. And it's a collar that weighs about 600 grams. It has a little drop off. So when the battery is done, it drops off. So they have the collar on for about 21 months or so. And we get really, really, really detailed information. They take a position every 5 hours. So we know where they are more or less all the time. But only a few of the cats have that. Then we also have cameras throughout the mountains. And from their unique pelt patterns, we can then recognize the cats and keep track of them that way. So we will know, from one year to the next, who is surviving, who is having young animals and these things. So, and a third way that we could keep track of it, but we don't really do, is through genetics. You can sort of, it's almost like a little barcode, like when you go shopping, the DNA will tell us that way too. But we are not working so much with DNA yet. So it's getting, I would say that the snow leopard community in general are not using DNA as much as in other fields or with other animals. I think down the road we will do more genetics.
Yeah, I know, that's fascinating, because it was during sort of the life of this long-term study that we like cracked the DNA code for snow leopards, right? To actually be able to tell individual cats from each other through DNA, and that happened as kind of a process of the study as well. I can't remember when that was, somewhere 2010 maybe.
Yeah, I must admit that somewhere around that range. Yeah, and I should say that we are collaborating, Snow Leopard Trust and a lot of other conservation organizations together, sort of on a global effort now to with Stanford University in the States to develop a cheaper DNA analysis, and they just did whole genome sequencing of the snow leopard genome. So that's quite interesting. So that is done now. And that was from a zoo animal. When you do that, you only really need one animal, but you basically have the whole DNA sequence, the whole thing. So that's quite interesting. So things are developing, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let's see. There's a question from Leah wondering if we have seen any shifts in the type of data we collect over the life of the long-term study? For example, is there more focus on effects of climate change or different diseases now than there was when the study first started?
Definitely. 2008, I mean, when Snow Leopard Trust have worked for so long time, and there's definitely more and more focus of climate change. And I mean, climate change is really going forward probably the biggest and scariest threat. The poles are predicted to be affected the most, and then the next one are the mountains. Basically, the animals are getting pushed higher and higher up in the mountains. There are more stronger competing animals coming from below. Water dynamics, everything is changing. These are very dry environments to start with. And if we talk to the herders, they're saying, yes, it's getting drier. We've looked at trends in the meteorological data, and yes, it's getting drier, less snow in winter. The wind patterns are changing. The way the rain falls, maybe the amount is the same, but we get just a few and very heavy rains, and it just washes away, and the ground doesn't have time to take it up. So quite big changes in the in climate change changes. Yes. Also, another thing that goes on, especially in Mongolia, but in all the other range countries too, is the increase in livestock numbers. So it's just this part of the world, like everywhere else, is getting more and more global and connected more into the global economy. So if you can sell more, of course, wherever you are, you're going to try and increase your income. So the global demand is increasing, or there's for goat fur, especially for cashmere, which is the underfur of the goats. So the herders are getting more and more goats. So the grazing pressure of the land is getting harder too. So we're seeing those changes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think too with the climate change, it's another kind of speaks to the importance of the long-term study, because we do have this data that can kind of back some of that up, right? When we're really looking at, like, are things getting drier, or like are things shifting? We have this whole over a decade's worth of really solid research to like bring to different proposals to show like changes that we've seen. So yeah, that's a really good point. Let's see. Laurel was wondering, are there shorter term studies that have spun off our longer term study, or has a long-term study gone in new directions due to new information from these shorter studies? So kind of how they're like informing each other.
Yeah, very good question. I think that's almost always how it is. You go in at the start and you have maybe 2 or 3 questions, and after those 2 or 3 questions, you have more questions than you thought you went into. Okay, we're going to try and answer these questions, and yeah, you at least somewhat answer them, but often you end up with more questions, which sparks ideas for shorter studies. And I should say that in Tost Mountains, we also do some short-term studies. Like we could have a master student coming in for maybe 2 years, do a specific study, which we have, we might have seen that's okay, this appears to be going on. Let's bring in a student to do a shorter study to do that. Or maybe we talk to some colleagues in India, and maybe we can do a comparative shorter study in Mongolia and India. So yes, definitely there's lots of spin-offs, and usually you have more questions at the end of a study than you have than when you started. So it just generates more questions as you learn.
Yeah. Let's see. I see one here from Scott, who is wondering, is there a reason we set the radio collars to every 5 hours rather than every 4 to 6, which would divide evenly into 24 hours? And does variability in the times or day give more information?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, if we had any even number like 4 or 6, we will get exactly the same time. And then somebody, or we maybe depending how we choose it, we could have a little bias. So now we have 5 hours, which means it's rolling. It changes all the time. That way we cover all the different hours of the day. But I don't even know. It might take 12. I assume it would take 12 days before we get. Then we've done a whole cycle. But we get data from all the different hours. Otherwise, we would get the same time periods all the time. Yeah. So that's why. I'm not sure if there was 2 questions there, but that's the reason why we have 5 hours, just to have a rolling, cover all different hours of the day.
Yeah, no, that's great. That answered that, which is interesting. I didn't know that either. So that was, I like that. Good answer and good question. Let's see, I have one from Mark, which we kind of touched on a little bit. Mark Blitzer is asking if there's any genetic work being done on captive snow leopards compared to the wild.
Yeah. We do collaborate a lot with our zoo partners, and so for the genetics study that's sort of hosted out of Stanford, the animal that they did the whole genome sequencing was a captive animal, and then also there's a lot of, I think we have talked a fair bit about that in our on our webpage, that some of the zoos have problem. It's some type of eye disease for the captive snow leopards. We've never seen it in the wild. So the American Zoo Association contacted us a few years ago to get DNA samples from wild cats and compare that to captive cats to try and see if they can figure out what's going on with this eye disease. And I don't really know. We just collected the data and gave to them. But so yeah, that would be almost the opposite. And what we did, we've done a lot of work with the zoo animals. Before we put on the first collars, we actually tried the collars on in Seattle just to make sure that the animals were not sort of scratching too much and being too uncomfortable. So
yeah, that's great. And I would also add, with a lot of the zoos that we partner with, they have, species survival plans, SSPs. And so we definitely work really closely with them as a conservation advisor to help both inform, both in captive and in wild populations and share data when we can to help, the survival of the species in the wild and what we can do. So we're, very grateful for our zoo partners.
I could add there now. I see it's focusing. Okay, I see the question there now. And with the captive population, one thing that's interesting with snow leopards that they haven't been in captivity for that long. I was at one of the World Zoo Association meeting one time, and they're talking about some of the animals they've had in zoos for so long, so they don't know who has bred with whom. So like they don't the different subpopulations of animals. Like let's say cheetah, for example, you have cheetah above the Saharas and below the Saharas, and you have cheetahs in Iran, but they mix them completely. So for a release program, they're not sort of clean genetically. Whereas snow leopards, they've been in captivity for so short time of a period, so they have a much better control, and they're breeding them a lot more controlled. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And each, there's a different like stud bookkeeper, right, that manages all of those and where they're traveling to, and to keep track of all that genetic information. It's a great point. Let's see. I have one from Ali asking if a dominant snow leopard can kill another snow leopard's cubs, if we've witnessed anything like that through our study.
It's quite common that it's called infanticide when you kill within your own species, and usually like lions, they would kill young. A new male comes in, kills the cubs, and therefore the female goes into heat. We haven't seen it. I would not be surprised if it does occur, because they reproduce every 2 years. So if a new male comes in, kills the young ones, let's say they're half a year old, she will likely breed the next year. Otherwise, it would take a year and a half. So for a new male coming in, you would think it would be beneficial. We haven't seen it, but they do fight a lot, and we have almost every adult male that we catch, they have lots of scars in the face. And this year we had our first cat that almost 100% sure that it's been killed. It had big bite marks in the face when we found it. It was dead, and it had severe bleeding from those bite marks. So they do fight a lot, and that was a young male that was just about to establish. So he was likely killed by a dominant male. But
yeah. Let's see, we have a question from Elizabeth, our good friend. Hi, Elizabeth. I know that you have met as well, but she's wondering, since she's involved with fish parasite research, she's kind of bringing it back to that original, parasite thread. This information can reveal connections in the overall ecosystem, right? A long-term study would be important for this, I suspect. Have you found any blood parasites? Is it too difficult to maintain integrity of blood samples?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Mongolia, it's the field conditions. We don't have like Elizabeth has been there twice, and so she knows the field conditions. That it's not having the lab is basically a gear. So it's not we can't we do have a freezer, so we can put them in there, but it's difficult. But Carol that did the disease work, she didn't look for blood parasites, but she looked for okay, I'm definitely no expert on this, and she's a vet, but how the different blood cells looked, which is indicative of their health. And there were no what do you call it, weird things. They were all looking healthy that way. Did not we haven't found or Carol then did not find anything about blood parasites. We haven't done so much about gut parasites either. Most of our work has been bacteria and viral diseases, so not so much about in the gut system parasites that way.
Yeah. I remember too talking with Elizabeth at one of our fundraisers about kind of the fish parasites. It's like fascinating. It's just, you know, the more you talk and learn about all of this, and like really how cohesively you can learn from it is really, really interesting. I have sort of a question for myself, just wondering, you know, I know we talked a little bit about Arctic foxes, like what moved you to snow leopard work?
Sorry, you disappeared a little bit. Could you say that again?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, no, I was just wondering what brought you to snow leopard work?
Okay, yeah, good question. Yeah, so I started off, I worked a lot with Arctic foxes, and so I did my master's and my PhD in Canada, and then I'm from Sweden, so then I moved back to Sweden, and then I got into lynx here and worked with lynx, and which are super fascinating animals as well. And I knew Örjan before I started in Snow Leopard Trust, and then he told me about this job, and you know, sort of banana peel, I applied and I got the job. And I think my background with working with cats like lynx, and then I had worked sort of in isolated areas with the Arctic fox, so that was a good sort of background getting in there. But like much else in life for me was banana peel. Of course, being super fascinated by the snow leopards, and cool job. I'm going to apply, but
yeah. Well, I'm certainly glad that you did, along with many others.
It's been great. So yeah, it's a great organization and great colleagues, and yeah, in all countries and everywhere. So it's great. Yeah.
It's amazing. Do you have like a favorite snow leopard encounter?
I don't know. I have a new favorite, and it's the one-eyed female F14. One eye, and Negnug, I think is her Mongolian name, which means one eye. And I'm just fascinated by her. She has only one eye. She's missing her right eye, and she's still being able to catch ibex. When I was there in this winter, one of the things that we were most curious about. I was following 4 different cats, and one eye or F14 was one of them, and we were sort of worried about, okay, this is maybe if you only have one eye, that might be an animal that turns into sort of what's often called a problem animal that only feed on livestock. But no, she was doing quite as well as the other ones in killing ibex. And I'm just fascinating that she should not have any depth perception with just one eye. Still, she's catching ibex. It's just amazing. She's a tough snow leopard lady. I like her. She's my favorite, I think.
I love that. I love that. I think we can post afterwards. We'll post a picture of her in the comments, because it's pretty. Every time I get her updates from the field, I get a little just heartened as well. It's pretty powerful. It speaks to the difficulty of the climate that they're living in, you know, but still make it work and are fighters.
Yeah, and we don't know why she lost the eye. It could have been many different things. It could have been a disease. It could maybe have been a fight. You know, if she because they do have females fight as well. So maybe she did get scratched in. Who knows? But yeah, we don't know how she lost the eye. But it's interesting. She's doing well.
It's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Gustav. I think we're gonna kind of move to our concluding activity here with a few other announcements. I appreciate your time today and all of these amazing questions as well that have come in. If you think of more please certainly either email social@snowleopard.org or just continue to use the comment section on Facebook, and we will go back through and assign those to various staff members to answer. So your questions are important. We want to get to them all, so please utilize that as well. And this will be saved on our Facebook page as well as on our blog. So please, if you've enjoyed it today, which I'm sure you have, please forward it to other people. A lot of people are asking what they can do to help support the research, and talking about it and sharing our mission with people, getting people involved is really kind of one of the most important things you can do just to elevate this research and everything that we're learning from it. So we also just launched our impact report from last year, 2019 impact report, that's on our blog, that has a lot of great information on there. So I suggest that you also check that out and share that with people. It's really great and digestible and talks about sort of some of these things we've talked about today and just our overall knowledge of snow leopards and what you've also helped accomplish in 2019 as we move into this new year as well. So we always end with a trivia question, kind of bringing it back to the beginning. And so Gustav, this one actually comes from inside the trust. That inquiring minds near and dear to you would like to know, how many jars of peanut butter do you go through in an average field season? And before you answer that, I was going to see if other people could try to guess as well how many jars of peanut butter Gustav
Let's
goes
say
through.
per month. So if I'm there for 1 month, how many peanut and 1 pound, 454 grams. How many of those roughly?
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Let's see.
And while these the answers are ticking in, I also just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for joining. It's always exciting to share our findings with you, and also want to thank Marisa, Liz, and Gustav for hosting. You're doing a great job, so thank you.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. It has really been great. I mean, I know these times, like we mentioned and you've heard before, are really difficult. But the one thing, I mean, being able to connect with people that usually are in the field or maybe a little bit less, reachable has been really, I think, a great thing for us to inform kind of how we want to connect moving forward and really engaging our supporters. So yes, I underscore that as well.
Okay, I see some of the answers here now. You're going to be disappointed. I see 12, 23, 15, 20. Oh, getting close. Well, I almost have to disappoint you. It's only about 5 per month. So when I was down now for 2 months in January and February, I went through 10 jars of peanut butter. So yeah, I still have a ways to go to get up to what I think is are the true peanut butter lovers here.
Here we were thinking that it was a lot. But yeah, and if there's anybody who is affiliated with a peanut butter brand that would like to sponsor our long-term study, let us know. We could have a Gustav line, Snow Leopard line. But no, thank you so much. It was great to spend time with you today, Gustav. I appreciate you guys all tuning in on a weekend. And we will have our next live chat 2 weeks from today, and we'll be putting it on Facebook as well as sending out an email. So tune in for that. And just be safe, everybody. Have a great weekend and take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.